All right, I want to welcome everybody into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. I want to thank you all for tuning into this solo cast, and it's a really important one because I want to look directly at who it is that is in charge in our global system. Now, it's quite obvious that we are moving into a new world order. We are moving into the system of global technocracy, really a new form of totalitarianism. And, a lot of times we'll throw around they. I mean, we've even watched Chappelle's skit from Saturday Night Live when he was joking about Kanye West and, oh, they are watching. He said, whoever they are. And there's a lot of mystery and a lot of speculation around they. And I think it's important to approach this topic with a sense of graciousness in a lot of ways. I'm not looking to demonize, not looking to call out individuals. That's not what I'm going to be doing in this episode. But I want to look directly at who is that they. And when you look at the hierarchical pyramid, which I'm going to go over with you later in this episode, you come to this group known as the Committee of 300. Now, you may have heard of it, you may have heard of it in passing, but ultimately, I want to read a quote here. There is no need to use they or the enemy, except as shorthand. We know who they, the enemy, is. And you can call it the enemy, whoever you want. But ultimately, when we get towards the top, we see this committee of 300. And really, the committee of 300, just to summarize briefly, it's an international council, a group of 300 individuals from all around the world, from various specters of the global plantation style, whether it's banking or politics, commerce, media. Really, they are a council that organizes all those different factors, the politics, the commerce, the military, really with the purpose of creating this global system. They've been around for a very long time. And in this episode, I want to speak directly about this group and who they are and ultimately what their plans are. Now, there was this gentleman, Dr. John Coleman, who I'm going to speak about, who really did a lot of work in exposing the Committee of 300. He wrote a great book called Conspirators Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300. And I highly recommend you guys check that out. It is available for free online if you want to just read the PDF. You can buy it on Amazon as well. I'm personally more of a physical book person. So when I'm reading something, I like to have the book in front of me, highlight things like that. But I've been reading a little bit of it online, and I do plan to order a physical copy at some point. But and I'm going to talk a little bit about more who he is and what he exposes. But there's a lot of information here, and I think it's important for us to stop generalizing and characterizing this they as some sort of mystery, because it's very clear who's running the show and what they are doing. And I think we need to understand that in order to take a deeper approach and actually find some solutions. So before we jump into it, if you're a fan of the show, consider a donation, Venmo, PayPal. I'm not an organization. I'm just an individual who's doing this work really for free. I don't get paid to do any of it. So it really is donations that help pay the rent, help put food on the table, and allow me to really focus and do this research. I feel called to really explore this. And, I sat with Spirit about, what is the right direction in terms of this approach and looking at these subjects. And I understand the implications. I understand there's danger in exposing these things. You really have to go through almost an internal death to approach this with a sense of graciousness, because I don't know what's going to come from me exposing this. It's quite obvious that the New World Order is coming into fruition, but you can only fear it when you fear your own mortality. So if you want to support the show and continue to keep me going in that sense, I greatly appreciate any donations. You can also check out my Substack, mcdermott.substack.com. And I do lay out a lot of these points in a recent Substack article, which I'll link below, and I'm going to be referencing a few things from it. So if you guys want to follow along, and there's an image I'm going to be referencing from there that I think you guys would appreciate. You can head on over there, mcdermott.substack.com. All subscriptions are, free, or you can do donation-based, and a donation-based subscription, or do a yearly subscription. That's all available on there. I greatly appreciate you guys doing that. And, whatever platform you're on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you're watching this on YouTube, they may take this one down from YouTube. I wouldn't be shocked. You can subscribe on there, and that helps more people find the show. But I do think it's important to look directly at who these people are and what are we actually dealing with. So, Committee of 300. Walter Rathenu, he outlined this in 1909. And he worked, I believe it was for General Motors. And he said 300 men, all of whom know one another, direct the economic destiny of Europe and choose their successors from amongst themselves. So, and ultimately, Europe has really infiltrated and imperialized in a lot of ways. Certainly, you can look at the history of imperialism and colonizing places, whether it be India or African nations. And we did that for a long time in a physical sense, right? In all these different Western nations. What people don't seem to realize, and what we don't teach in our schools, is that this imperialism, it never stopped, right? Imperialism has continued. Now it is in an economic sense. Now it is in this global, almost covert means, really through deep state organizations and deep state politics, that we are infiltrating different nations, and you see different regime changes. You see different ways that commerce is dictated and the hand that Western nations, and China in particular. And you got to remember, China, while it appears to be its own sovereign nation, it is connected to this global web as well. They are part very much of this New World Order implementation. If you look at the system China that has in place, that is a perfect example of what is attempted to be brought into the West, right? So China is very much in this as well at this point. They have been infiltrated by the New World Order. So really, the committee, I'm not going to go super deep into the history here, but it started out with the British East India Company. And there's so much you can read about the British East India Company and the influence that they had. But that was founded in 1727. So we're talking about this committee and their Council of 300. This is founded prior to the inception of the United States. And if you even look at when the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, that was actually the year that the Illuminati was founded. And how did the Illuminati actually gain influence? It was through infiltrating different organizations. A lot of times, Freemasonry and the Illuminati, for example, they're very interlinked. But what actually happened was the Illuminati infiltrated Freemasonry. And so they went to the top of Freemasonry, and most Freemasons have no idea about the Illuminati. They think they're just in this fraternal brotherhood. And Freemasonry in itself, it lost what it was to the Illuminati in the upper echelons of Freemasonry. And they realized you don't got to go through all these processes to become illuminated and enlightened. No. So it was even late 1700s. I'm blanking on the name of who it was, but it was one of the founders of Freemasonry. And he said, we have been infiltrated and we need to disband this entire organization based on the level of coercion and infiltration that has taken place within our organization. And obviously that didn't happen. But in Freemasonry now, I mean, it's in every town, every city. And a lot of the people who join this, again, don't go out and bash your local Freemasons by any means. Most of these people, they don't understand what is happening sort of at the global scale within this organization. So again, Committee of 300, been around for a very, very long time. They have taken deep root within all of our systems. And in one area in particular that they have been able to infiltrate and use has been the banking, right? And we see this with Federal Reserves. We see this with central banks. And, I think it can be a whole episode in itself to explore the history in the role of the central banking system. But it's interesting, if you even look at the United States and you date back as far as Andrew Jackson, every single president of the United States that has ever been assassinated, was assassinated. They were openly against central banks. I mean, you can look at Andrew Jackson, and he wasn't assassinated, but in 1835 there was an assassination attempt on his life, right? And his assassin, Richard Lawrence, they asked him why he tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson, and he said the money would be plenty. Andrew Jackson said in particular, I have one quote here, the bold effort the present central bank has made to control the government are but premonitions of the fate that await the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it. And that assassination attempt was 1835. Like I said, it's no coincidence. And I'll give you every single president that's been assassinated. You got Abe Lincoln. He said, I have two great enemies, the Southern Army in front of me and the bankers in the rear. Of the two, the one at my rear is my greatest foe, right? Same thing with James A. Garfield. What did he say in 1881? Whoever controls the volume of money in our country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled one way or another by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate. That's 1881. That was 2 weeks before his assassination. And then President McKinley, strong supporter of the gold standard, and he actually passed the Gold Standard Act of 1900, and that was less than a year before his assassination. He believed in economic freedom and prosperity. So President McKinley, he did not last in office. And then, of course, JFK. And there's a whole lot of reasons why his assassination may have taken place, and a lot of people link it to the CIA. Not everybody talks about his stance on the Federal Reserve. And he actually passed Executive Order 11110, which stripped the Federal Reserve from its power of loaning money to the U.S. government, right? And then 6 months later, he's killed. What does LBJ do immediately upon entering office? He reverses that. So really, the economic front is where this committee has sort of always dominated. And even if you look at things like military and you look at all these different areas that they control, it's all economic based. Who controls commerce controls the world, right? And that's what we have really become, I would say, enslaved in a lot of ways by. So let's get into the Committee of 300 directly. I mean, because they've always had their hands in the central banks. They've always had their hands in the Federal Reserve. Those are direct manifestations from this committee. And Dr. John Coleman, he was a British intelligence agent. So he was working, he saw behind the scenes, and he only discovered the committee because he was accidentally given high-class intelligence documents. And, so he started to really uncover a lot of this work here. And he ended up publishing 12 books that exposed the New World Order. And he always specifically focused on the Committee of 300. And this was his direct quote on them, just to give sort of what they are. The Committee of 300 is the ultimate secret society made up of an untouchable ruling class, which includes the Queen of England, the Queen of Netherlands, the Queen of Denmark, and the royal families of Europe. These aristocrats decided at the death of Queen Victoria, the matriarch of the Venetian Black Aguliffs, that in order to gain worldwide control, it would be necessary for its aristocratic members to go into business with the non-aristocratic but extremely powerful leaders of corporate business on a global scale. And so the doors to ultimate power were opened to what the Queen of England likes to refer to as the commoners. Now, again, and I want to read this quote. This is again from him. There is no need to use they or the enemy except as shorthand. We know who they, the enemy, is. The Committee of 300, with its Eastern liberal establishment aristocracy, its banks, insurance companies, giant corporations, foundations, communication networks, presided over by a hierarchy of conspirators. This is the enemy. Now, and he actually outlined 21 points of what their goals are, and I'll get into that in a minute. And this was in his book, Conspirators Hierarchy, which I already mentioned earlier. And This was published 30 years ago. So we've already started to see a lot of this come to fruition, and you'll see how all these dots are sort of connected here. But ultimately, this has been going on for so long. It's so deeply rooted in our system that I almost wonder if our system is able to be saved based on the influence that this committee has, based on the influence of the structures that they have created. What I want to do before jumping into that is to give sort of how does the hierarchy actually work when we talk about this, and where do certain groups fall, where do corporations fall? Just to give sort of a scope on how power resides. Ultimately, David Icke describes this beautifully when he talks about the structure of this. It's like an interconnected web, a global web that's behind the scenes. And you can really start to see how all the pieces start to fit together. And it's ultimately, they use a pyramid model. And I have this image that is in my Substack article that I would encourage you guys to go look at, that has this pyramid. And it shows exactly where all these different groups are, right? So let's take a look at this. At the very bottom of the pyramid, the foundation of the pyramid is us. It's the population. It's the workers. As the committee would call us, it's the peasants, right? And we make up the vast majority. We make up the foundation of this. Without us, this is not possible. It's important to keep that in mind. And why I have, I heard the phrase hope is a poor man's plea. And to a large degree, I really agree with that, because I think we need more than hope. We need to know that we are going to overturn this, and we need to know how capable we are. So, but at the bottom, we have the population. We got the working class, right? And they really do make this structure possible because we buy into it, right? If we just say, nah, we ain't doing this, it would be all over. And I think if people realized what it is that they're actually buying into within our system here, they would this would not fly. We would not go along with this whatsoever. So it's important to realize the bottom population right above us. And how many tiers do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got 8 right? So lowest tier, population. And this is the population. The next tier, the second lowest tier, is world population control. So who is directly dealing with these peasants, right? And this is the governments. This is the intelligence community. This is the military, the police, the courts. This is the media. This is the schools. This is religion. It's really, and there's a whole lot you could say about religion. I think a lot of religions are founded in truth, but the religion certainly has been used as a method of control. That's why religion is included in there. That's not to say religion is all inherently bad. But the world population control is our governments, the second lowest tier. A lot of people think government runs the world. Government is just a manifestation of a control mechanism. The politicians, they are really low on the totem pole. They have very low power. I mean, and you have certain people who play roles within politics. Certainly you have the Bush family, right? Where the Bushes speculated they're on the committee of 300. So you have people who come down and play in these roles, but you got to realize the government is just one small faction of this. When you beg to your government for a change, they don't report to you. They report up the ladder. They have to go up the pyramid. They're not serving you. They are serving up this ladder. Right? It's the same thing with military, police, the court system, our judicial system. They taught us about the legislative and executive and judicial branch as a way for us to understand government and to think that they have all the control. No, they have no control. They taught us those things to distract us from really who is in power, to who holds the real power, right? And so who does the world population control? Who do they report to? Well, they report to the World Resource Control. They report to the corporations. This is your Pfizers. This is your IBMs, your Exxons. This is your big oil. This is all of the big pharma. This is all the corporations that exchange the money. This is the ones who are playing with the capital, right? And this is the ones who dictate government policy. So they're kind of in control of all the resources, how they're distributed, and ultimately in charge of a lot of the finance. Not purely finance control, but they're in charge of playing with the finance, right? So governments report The corporations. Now, who do corporations can report to? And they're the third lowest tier. Now we're starting to get up the ladder. Now we get to world financial control. Okay, this is your central banks. This is your tax revenues. This is the World Bank. This is the Federal Reserve. Now we're starting to get a little bit up there in the sense of, okay, these people hold some real power. They are in charge of all finance. They are the ones who make the finance happen. They are the ones who dictate financial policy in a sense, right? And so they're in the middle of this pyramid. Now, there are four tiers that are above them. And this is where you start to get into very, very, very select individuals. And you got to realize a lot of people who are playing within this pyramid structure, a lot of the corporations, a lot of the people who are even in charge of the central banks, I'm sure some of them don't even realize how deep this goes. So who does the World Financial Control report to? If they are not at the top of the ladder, who are they going to? Now, this is your think tanks, okay? This is the Bilderberg Group. This is the United Nations. This is the this is your Council on Foreign Relations, right? This is the World Economic Forum. This is the World Health Organization. And some of these groups are very much out in the open. We know about them. Obviously, United Nations. Everybody knows about the United Nations. But you have groups that are like the Club of Rome. And I've detailed in depth in my Substack in the past. If you're a subscriber, maybe you remember this one. About the Club of Rome's influence on starting the World Economic Forum, right? All of the World Economic Forum ideologies are just Club of Rome. It's Club of Rome. That's who created them. So, and it's neo-Malthusianism, and it's depopulation, and it's, you've traced it far back enough, it's the same eugenics policies, right? So this is the think tanks, the world are who the World Financial Control ultimately report to, right? But this pyramid goes higher. Who do the think tanks report to? Who is overseeing the think tanks? And this is the Committee of 300. This is who we're talking about today. This is the world's richest, most powerful sub-families. You know, you have the quote unquote 300 most elite people in the world who come together and oversee these think tanks and oversee the World Financial Control and oversee the World Resource Control, oversee the World Population Control, and oversee the population. Now, they are the ones who decide together the direction of this. They decide the direction of humanity. But again, above them, there's even further. You have the Crown Council of 13, and I'm not going to get into them. This is the world's richest, most powerful families. You can go and do research and find who those world's richest and most powerful families are. There's not a ton of information about them out there, but you can find it. I'm not going to be the one to not, at least not today. I'm not going to tell you too much about them. And above them, at the top of the tier, you have a world monarch. And I will say, I do believe there is a world monarch who is overseeing all of this. And within the Crown Council of 13, there is one family in particular that is sort of in charge here. And you can put guesses as to who that is, or you can go do your own research. It's out there. You can go find it. But that's sort of the hierarchy. I'll go over it one more time. You have population at the bottom. Again, we make up the foundation. Without us, none of this is possible. We don't have to buy into the system. We choose to consent to it. So keep in mind, it's only our consent that allows this to continue. Okay? So, yeah, it's only us that allows that to continue. Above us, we have world population control, governments. They're controlled by the World Resource Control, the corporations who are controlled by the World Financial Control, central banks who are controlled by the think tanks, who are controlled by the Committee of 300, who are controlled by the Crown Council, who is overseen by the world monarch. Now, with the New World Order appearing to have already infiltrated pretty much all of our institutions globally, this knowledge seems pretty important to get out there, don't you think? Seems pretty important that people understand this structure. Seems pretty important that people look at their surroundings and say, wow, I'm really buying into this system of enslavement. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through John Coleman's work directly. Dr. Coleman, it's from his book directly, The Conspirator's Hierarchy. And you can read it for free. It's online. If you just look up Conspirator's Hierarchy, I wouldn't do Google. You're probably not going to find it there, but other search engines. And DuckDuckGo, I believe, is infiltrated. They seem to be not free fully, but you can find it on DuckDuckGo if you use that one, as well as a few others. Just type in the book and PDF will pop up. But again, I like physical copies, but you can read it for free if you don't want to go buy a copy. But I want to read directly from it and what are the stated intentions. And it's very similar when I read out Project Bluebeam. When I was reading that, I'm like, oh my God, it's all coming to fruition. It's already here. You're going to see the same thing with these 21 goals. I'm going to dive in, and it's going to be pretty obvious in terms of what has already come into place. You got to remember, this is 30 years ago. So let's read it. What are the goals of the secret elite group, the inheritors of Illuminism, Moriah conquering wind, the cult of Dionysus, the cult of Isis, Catholicism, Bogmilism? This elite group that also calls itself the Olympians, and that's another name that they give themselves, this Committee of 300, the Olympians. They truly believe they are equal in power, in stature, to the legendary gods of Olympus, who have, like Lucifer, their god, set themselves above our true God. Absolutely believe they have been charged with implementing the following by divine right. So it's important to recognize that, and you can even look at groups like the World Economic Forum. Yuval Noah Harari stating this directly. They are the gods. They believe they are gods. And it's funny because it is a half spiritual truth. Like a part of them recognizes their own spiritual nature as God. Like that's what it truly means to open yourself up and live connected to spirit. You realize you are a manifestation and a direct point of expression of God. But they have taken this and taken that truth and twisted it, and they don't recognize us as gods. They only see themselves as God. That's like the ultimate. It's funny. It makes me think of a Ram Dass story where he talks about seeing his brother in a mental hospital. He went to visit him. I think it was his brother, but his brother was there because he kept saying, "I'm God, I'm Jesus," and really acting out. And he said, this brother asked Ram Dass, who came in robes and all this, and Ram Dass, very spiritual, very connected and knowing. And Ram Dass got asked by his brother, why is it that you're out there when you come in looking at like this, and his brother's all in like a suit and everything, you come in looking like this, why are you not the one locked up in here? And he asked him, he's like, are you God? And he said, yeah, of course I am. And he said, am I God? No, you're not God. I'm Jesus. I'm God. All this. And Ram Dass said, that's why you're in there. And I'm out here. Right? So you have to recognize everybody else as God, or it turns into this psychopathic manifestation and need for control over others, because you don't view them in the same reverence and light. So let's see what they believe they have the divine right to implement through their God status. Number one, a one world government, new world order, with a unified church and monetary system under their direction. Not many people are aware that the one world government began setting up its church in the 1920s and 1930s, for they realized the need for a religious belief inherent in mankind to have an outlet, and therefore set up a church body to channel that belief in the direction they desired. And, we're already beginning to see this one world religion push come through. And I would encourage you guys to check out my episode on Project Bluebeam, where Sergei Manas really talks about the implementation of a one world religion and a lot of the foundational principles of what that looks like. So it's very important to be mindful about the type of spiritual content that you're engaging with, even channeling as well, based on a lot of the technologies that they have present. Sometimes the channeled information is from the technology, and you're channeling in what they want for this one world religion. You have to be very mindful. Is this truly the word of God? Is it coming from in my heart, or is this something that feels a little bit off? You got to look at a lot of new age spiritual principles are rooted in duality, separation. And you got to be very, very careful about that. Number two, the utter destruction of all national identity and national pride. Of course, we're already seeing this take place. And I think, again, there's something to be said about not being attached to your nationality, where, I don't define myself necessarily as American. I view myself as a human being, and I was born into America. It just so happens. But the pillar for destroying national identity and why they do that is they don't want sovereignty within nations. They don't want sovereignty within culture, right? National identity, in a way, it can represent a decentralized model. And I think national identity, sometimes it almost feels too big, and it paves the way for centralization. But it represents decentralized in the sense, at least from the global governance perspective, right? Which is why they want to destroy it and why we're seeing the destruction of it. Number three, the destruction of religion, and more especially the Christian religion, with the one exception, their own creation mentioned above. And again, this is something so clear. We're seeing the destruction of Christianity in particular. And it's interesting. If you look at the tenets of Christianity, that's one of the most radical religions out there, which is why they want to destroy it, right? And it's one of the only religions that actually has a figurehead within it, Jesus, that represents unconditional love and unconditional purity. It's Christ consciousness. That's why I do believe it is one of the more powerful religions out there. If you are practicing it with reverence and you are truly honoring Christ consciousness. I mean, how many Christians do you know that don't honor Christ consciousness or embody Christ consciousness? You are meant to embody it. When it's talked about Jesus coming back, people talking about Jesus coming to save you, yeah, you're supposed to be Jesus. You are supposed to embody that Christ consciousness. You are the Christ. That's what Jesus taught. Again, and that's a principle I talked a lot with. It was Dr. Betty Kovacs, I'd say it was earlier this year. If you scroll back a little bit, Dr. Betty Kovacs, her and I talked about Christ consciousness and what it really means to embody that. So that's a big one we're seeing take place, and there is a big demonization in Christianity in particular. So number four, control of each and every person through means of mind control and what Brzezinski calls technotronics, which would create human-like robots in a system of terror, besides which Felix Brzezinski read terror will look like children at play. And this is something, transhumanism, the emergence of AI, artificial intelligence. Ultimately, we are being led directly into having this implemented into us and using technology to mind control. MK Ultra never died. MK Ultra is still very present. There are many targeted individuals, me saying that alone might get this podcast taken off YouTube, where they have already experimented with brain chips in people, Neuralink, the work Elon Musk is doing in particular, right? A lot of people want to talk about Elon Musk being the savior. Elon Musk does not care about you at all. How convenient it is that everything he is doing, it directly plays into the smart grid, directly plays into transhumanism, directly plays into linking mankind with artificial intelligence. Even his purchase of Twitter, all it's leading to is the creation of the X app, which is similar to the WeChat in China, and it's going to be an everything app, right? Elon Musk has even said this. We're creating X through Twitter. He said it. He tweeted it. Go find it. And what that's going to do is it's going to provide a foundation for central bank digital currencies, a place where that can thrive. Digital identification, a place where you have that. Your social credit score will be linked to this everything app. You'll have everything all within one place. Oh, how convenient. No. Look at the bigger picture here. And Elon Musk, the technologies that he's creating, he is in the big club. It's very, very obvious. And I did a Substack on that. Musk, Twitter, and transhumanism. The bird is free, but at what cost? And I outline all of these different areas. Again, go to the Substack. If you haven't subscribed to the Substack by now, I don't think you realize how much we dive into these things and the type of. No, I don't think I've really had a podcast where I talk about Elon Musk or I talk about him in particular. So go check that out. Again, it's all right there. The information is all right there. All it takes is a little bit of digging. So number five. An end to all industrialization in the production of nuclear-generated electric power in what they call the post-industrial zero-growth society, exempted are the computer and service industries. United States industries that remain will be exported to countries such as Mexico, where abundant slave labor is available. Unemployables in the wake of industrial destruction will either become opium, heroin, and or cocaine addicts or become statistics in the elimination process as we know today as Global 2000. And we're beginning to see that industrialization and the push to the Green New Deal and the new type of economy. Yeah, this all plays into that end of industrialization. Number 6, legalization of drugs and pornography. That seems fairly obvious, and it's interesting because I think certain quote-unquote drugs like psilocybin and DMT, those things, it would be helpful to have that legalized, but we don't want it controlled by governments, right? But again, we're seeing the decriminalization, and you see what happens in areas like San Francisco with the rampant drug use, right? And what happens when that is just sort of allowed and promoted. So, number 7, depopulation of large cities, according to the trial run carried out by the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. If you guys don't know about Pol Pot and what happened in Cambodia, do go read about it. It's very, very telling. It is interesting to note that Pol Pot's genocidal plans were drawn up here in the United States by one of the Club of Rome's research foundations. It is also interesting that the committee is presently seeking to reinstate the Pol Pot butchers in Cambodia. Club of Rome, that's familiar, huh? Yeah, they're the ones who created the World Economic Forum and had a hand in almost all of our global policies today. They're the ones who have really started a lot of the climate change movement. They're the ones who started this overpopulation myth. They're the ones who are advocating for global reduction in population down to at least 1 billion. I posted a video on my Twitter about a week or two ago. It was Mark Meadows, one of the founders of the Club of Rome, speaking about how do we get the world, we're at about 7 million. How do we get the world population down to about 1 billion? I hope we can do it peacefully. I didn't know genocide can be peaceful, Mr. Meadows. That's quite the revelation that you have. So it tells you what they think about you. This is a depopulation genocide plan. Number 8, and again, just a reminder, we're looking at the Committee of 300's goals. This all comes back to the Committee of 300 and what they hope to implement. Number 8, suppression of all scientific development, except for those deemed beneficial by the committee. Especially targeted is nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Particularly hated are the fusion experiments presently being scorned and ridiculed by the committee and its jackals of the press. Development of the fusion torch would blow the committee's conception of limited natural resources right out the window. A fusion torch properly used could create unlimited, untapped natural resources from the most ordinary substances. Fusion torches uses are legion and would benefit mankind in a matter which is as yet not even remotely comprehended by the public. Trust the science. Trust the science. We know exactly how science is used to bring in a particular agenda. We've seen that demonstrated perfectly clear with over the last 2.5 years with all the insanity regarding quote unquote the science. Now, there's limited natural resource. I want to highlight that as well. That's really important. The idea of scarcity around natural resources has kept us perpetually enslaved. I mean, all you have to do is go back and look at the research of Nikola Tesla, and you realize that global free energy is already possible. He demonstrated exactly how to do it. And what happened? This committee, these people, these elites, they put Tesla in ruins. They ruined him. He actually lived out the end of his life in pure poverty because they completely took him down. So scientific development, not going to happen. There is no science. There's no true science that is experimented or researched in our institutions. It's all done independently, at least real science is. Number 9, caused by means of limited wars in the advanced countries and by means of starvation and disease in third world countries, the death of 3 billion people by the year 2000, people they call useless eaters. Now, the 3 billion people obviously did not die by the year 2000, which is good, which is progress. They're not getting it implemented as fast as they would like. The Committee of 300 commissioned Cyrus Vance to write a paper on this subject and how best to bring about such genocide. The paper was produced under the title The Global 2000 Report and was accepted and approved for action by President Carter on and behalf of the U.S. government and accepted by Edwin Muskie, the Secretary of State. Under the terms of the Global 2000 Report, the population of the United States is to be reduced by 100 million by the year 2050. And I think it's very evident that's the direction we're moving in with a lot of our policies and how they're planning all these different destructions of our system and wars. And, they want us gone. Goes back to that idea of the useless eaters that you all know are already called us. They're already saying these things and they treat us as animals. It's only a matter of time before. And, look at how many people line up for their own potential euthanasia. Look at what's going on in Canada right now, where they're approving. Clearly, the idea of death with dignity and assisted suicide was a slippery slope, because now, if you have mental illness, you can be approved to just let the government kill you. Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And they're euthanizing the elderly. They're euthanizing the poor as a way to escape poverty. Are you kidding me? Yeah, let's not address poverty. Let's just kill all the poor people. That's what the government is doing in Canada. That's genocide. Textbook. Number 10. To weaken the moral fiber of the nation and to demoralize workers in the labor class by creating mass unemployment. As jobs dwindle due to the post-industrial zero-growth policies introduced by the Club of Rome, demoralized and discouraged workers will resort to alcohol and drugs. The youth of the land will be encouraged by means of rock music and drugs to rebel against the status quo, thus undermining and eventually destroying the family unit. In this regard, the Committee of 300 commissioned Tavistock Institute to prepare a blueprint as to how 24 this could be achieved. Tavistock directed Stanford Research to undertake the work under the direction of Professor Willis Harman. This work later became known as the Aquarian Conspiracy. Now, you're already seeing that in the United States in particular. Certain music, certain ideas, certain ways the culture is promoted. And you see policies like lockdowns, for example, that creates mass unemployment. So we're seeing the mass unemployment come to fruition with this huge economic crash coming. Who knows what that's going to lead to in terms of employment? It seems like everywhere is looking for workers, but at the same time, we're toying this line where we may see that devastating unemployment come back, or in the closure of small business. And I believe I read it was over 90% of American workers are employed by what would be considered small businesses of less than, might have been 100 people, right? So if those go, where do those 90% of the workforce go? Number 11, to keep people everywhere from deciding their own destinies by means of one created crisis after another, and then managing such crises. That sounds familiar, don't it? This will confuse and demoralize the population to the extent where faced with too many choices, apathy on a massive scale will result. In the case of the United States, an agency for crisis management is already in place. It is called the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, whose existence I first disclosed in 1980. There will be more on FEMA as we proceed. I'm sure you guys have heard of FEMA by now, and there was the creation of FEMA camps. So, again, created crises. That is what we have seen play out. Perfect textbook example with the insanity of the last 2.5 years. Number 12, to introduce new cults and continue to boost those already functioning, which include rock music gangsters, such as the filthy, degenerate Mick Jagger's Rolling Stones, a gangster group much favored by European black nobility, and all of the Tavistock created rock groups, which began with the Beatles. It's interesting, because there's actually a lot to really research there with these groups that have been created and promoted. Who are they from? Where are they from? What is the story behind them? What is the truth in them? There's a lot there. To continue build up the cult of Christian fundamentalism begun by the British East India Company servant Darby, which will be misused to strengthen the Zionist state of Israel through identifying with the Jews through the myth of God's chosen people, and by denoting very substantial amounts of money to what they mistakenly believe is a religious cause in the furtherance of Christianity. That last part, very relevant today. The racket, the anti-Semitism racket is in full force. I mean, the ADL, for example, Anti-Defamation League, they create more quote unquote anti-Semitism than they actually claim to solve. I will say this about the anti-Semitic, whatever you want to call it, that's going around. Is Kyrie Irving anti-Semitic? No. Is Kanye West anti-Semitic? No. What they have done, the reason they're being labeled as anti-Semitic is they believe they are the original Hebrews. They are the original Jews, right? And so I think it's almost pointless to argue who are the original Jews, which is sort of where a lot of this, again, it's a divide and conquer method. But the people in charge of Israel, the people who run a lot of our institutions, and a lot of people say, oh, the Jews run everything. It's not helpful to say that. That's not necessarily true in the sense because the ultra Zionists that's referenced here, the Zionist state, they're not actually Jewish. They use Judaism as a front, and it creates this anti-Semitism racket. So where you can't criticize Israel, you can't criticize Zionism. And I might get heat just for even saying that. Somebody will hear this be like, anti-Semitism. Ben Shapiro will come on at me or something, right? Because left, right, it doesn't matter. They all buy into this Zionist state. And most Jews, they have no idea about this. They're like, they practice Judaism with reverence. There's so much reverence and light within that to be found. I mean, you could pull up texts in any religion that depict monstrosity and violence. And I see people trying to pull it up for Judaism in particular. Most practicing Jews hold reverence for their religion, hold reverence for others. And, there is no need to divide ourselves through religion like this. But we have to recognize, are the heads of the Zionist state actually God worshiping and holding reverence? No. And they're not practicing Judaism. They use it as a front. Just thought I'd put that out there because it's very relevant today. Number 14, to press for the spread of religious cults, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Muslim fundamentalism, the Sikhs, and to carry out experiments of the Jim Jones and Son of Sam type of murders. It is worth noting that the late Ayatollah Khomeini was a creation of British intelligence Military Intelligence Division 6, commonly known as M16, as I reported in my 1985 work, What Really Happened in Iran. Again, this is 1992, so everything that happened with Iraq, ISIS, again, those are all ISIS, a perfect example, a creation of our intelligence agency, right? So again, religious cults, they are popping up, and this plays into one of the later points that he makes. 15, to export religious liberation ideas around the world so as to undermine all existing religions, but more especially the Christian religion. This began with Jesuit liberation technology, which brought about the downfall of the Somoza family rule in Nicaragua, and which is today destroying El Salvador, now 25 years into a civil war, Costa Rica, and Honduras. One very active 25 entity engaged in so-called liberation theology is the communist-oriented Maryknoll Mission. This accounts for the extensive media attention to the murder of the 4 of Maryknoll's so-called nuns in El Salvador a few years ago. The 4 nuns were communist subversive agents, and their activities were widely documented by the government of El Salvador. The United States press and news media refused to give any space or coverage to the massive documentation in possession of the Salvadorian government, documentation which proves what the Maryknoll Mission nuns were doing in the country. Maryknoll is in service in many countries and played a leading role in bringing communism to Rhodesia, Mozambique, Angola, and South Africa. And what you hear the United States doing there, they've done it all over the world, all over South America, Central America, Europe, Asia. This is happening everywhere. Africa, same playbook, right? You look into a lot of these quote-unquote regime changes or interventions, whatever it may be. It's our own problem, reaction, solution. We create the problem so we can impose our own solution. That's exactly what it is. Number 16, to cause a total collapse of the world's economies and engender total political chaos. That sounds really familiar right now, doesn't it? Every economic crash that has ever been planned, you can even look at the Great Depression. It's all planned to further strengthen the centralization of banks and power. Number 17, to take control of all foreign and domestic policies of the United States. That seems to be happening. Number 18, to give the fullest support to supranational institutions such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Court, and as far as possible, make local institutions of lesser effect by gradually phasing them out, bringing them under the mantle of the United Nations. Again, that appears to be happening. The World Bank holds a lot of power. Number 19, and this is another one that's happening, penetrate and subvert all governments. And work from within them to destroy the sovereign integrity of nations represented by them. That sounds familiar to what Uncle Klaus had to say about penetrating the cabinets of governments, isn't that right? So they're doing that, through the works of the World Economic Forum, for example, and the young global leaders, and they get all these people who are part of this big cult, and again, who maybe report to the World Economic Forum. They are the ones in power. You look at who's an agenda contributor to the World Economic Forum. Yeah, it's quite obvious. Number 20, we got two more here. Organize a worldwide terrorist apparatus and negotiate with terrorists whenever terrorist activities take place. It will be recalled that it is Bettino Craxi who persuaded the Italian and U.S. governments to negotiate with the Bread Brigade's kidnappers of Prime Minister Moro and General Dozier. As an aside, General Dozier is under orders not to talk about what happened to him. Should he break that silence, he will no doubt be made a horrible example of in the manner in which Kissinger dealt with Aldo Moro. Worldwide terrorist apparatus. Again, we've seen this war on terror be promoted over the last 20, 30 years. So again, all of this has really come to fruition since he said this 30 years ago. And last one, take control of education in America with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it. That, and I come from a teaching background, that has absolutely already happened. Take your kids out of public school. Much of these goals, which I first enumerated in 1969, have since been achieved or are well on their way to being achieved. Of special interest in the Committee of 300 program is the core of their economic policy, which is largely based on the teaching of Malthus, the son of an English country person who was pushed to prominence by the British East India Company, upon which the Committee of 300 is modeled. And again, when I outline the foundation of what the World Economic Forum is and their principles of eugenics, Malthus was a eugenicist, and a lot of his neo-Malthusian ideas, they're just eugenics basically rebranded, right? So these 21 points, it's a eugenics-based system, a eugenics-based hierarchy that we're living with under. And us at the bottom of this pyramid, we really have to choose whether or not, is this what we want? Is this what we want? And if it is, well, by all means, help ourselves, right? We can succumb to the rule of this Committee of 300 and this Crown Council, these elite, most powerful families that a lot of people have probably never even heard of. You start looking at the Crown Council of 13, there's names you might not even recognize. Only a few you recognize. I promise you that. But that's the structure of our world. And hopefully this episode has helped you connect a few dots and sort of see, I would say, where power lies and what the plans are and how the implementation is rolling out and how all these dots connect, right? There is no such thing as coincidence in this. So in terms of solutions, well, that's for you to decide. Do you choose to buy into this? Can you recognize that there are no political solutions to the problem of government? None. There are no political solutions to the problem of government. So with that in mind, take the actions necessary that you need in order to be free. I don't believe in violence as the answer. I don't believe in any of that. We can have a peaceful transition into a recognition of who we are, a foundation, a system that is built upon who we are. Because if we choose to not buy into the system like that, it's over. It's over. But we have to choose that. Are we going to choose our enslavement or are we going to choose freedom? Where the collective ends up going, that seems to be where most of us are going, because the smart grid that's being created, it's going to be inescapable. Thanks, Elon Musk, shooting up all your satellites and creating these technologies, the brain chips, smart cars, all of that. It's going to be inescapable if we allow this technological dystopia to be created. So with that in mind, don't be discouraged. Don't be afraid. Really sit with, who am I? beyond this name, this identity, at the core, who am I? I am an embodiment of God. I am Christ consciousness. I am love. I cannot be controlled unless I choose to be controlled. That's who you are. And this whole system, it is designed specifically for you to forget that. That's all it is. That's all it is. So I'll leave you with that. That's quite a lot of information to stomach and swallow. I would say if you want a quick resource and quick guide on all this, you can head on over to the Substack, and it's in the episode description, so you can just click on it. But if you're a fan of the show, leave a donation, help a brother out. Support this work and independent work. I don't get paid for any of this. This is sort of all my own research and all my own doing here. So, and I would recommend you guys check out Dr. Coleman's Conspirators Hierarchy book if you want to learn more about the Committee of 300. I am going to be doing some more diving into these areas because, I'm done looking at the World Economic Forum. I'm done looking at these politicians. They're like, so many people are in a reactionary state. They're in a reactionary state where they react to what Biden does, or they react to the World Economic Forum. They don't care. Like, you think the Committee of 300 cares if you react on the World Economic Forum? No, they're 10 steps ahead of that. They're 10 steps ahead of that. Those are all fall guys. Even Bill Gates, a fall man, a front, all of it. You if Bill Gates weren't here, somebody else would be doing the same exact thing. So you really got to look at the bigger picture here if you want solutions. I'm done reacting and playing small with this and just being like the rest of everybody else and just reacting. We got to look at the bigger picture here. So that's what I'm going to keep doing. If you want to support this work, you can follow me along for the journey. But that's going to wrap up this episode. And I'll see you guys next time. So long.